I'm Joshua Landau, Senior Counsel for Innovation Policy at CCIA. I'm joined by Ari Anderson, Daniel Castro, and Joseph Howler to discuss where AI is going, how the US can keep its advantage. That's a big topic, and we only have so much time, so why don't we get started? Daniel, could you kind of give us an overview? It's important to understand the structure of the AI marketplace, who the participants are. Do you think you could just give us a quick overview of what that looks like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so the industry, of course, has been, investing in this area for, close to a decade. And obviously, the current wave of AI is really exciting to a lot of people, but it's important to remember that this has been going on for a while. So you have certainly the big players, the Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, and Apple, who are heavily invested in the tech sector, including areas in AI. They all have some of the kind of leading AI models that have been released. But it's also important to recognize that there's a lot of really interesting innovation happening with startups in this space. So, for example, when you think about the traditional large players in video editing or image editing, I mean, you do have companies like Adobe who are making just incredible advances with AI. They're integrating it into the Photoshop tools that so many people are using. But you also have startups like Pika and Stability, that are releasing really innovative tools. These are companies that weren't around a couple of years ago, and are releasing tools using their own cutting edge AI models that can generate video from just a few words, that can do all sorts of really interesting image generation or video editing. And that's what I think is really exciting about this space, that US companies are really able to move rapidly in ways that we haven't seen until recently.
Thanks. And I think it sounds like there's not a huge barrier to entry. We have the idea of sort of these large models that take millions of dollars to train, but that's not the only thing in this space. There's also sort of an ancillary ecosystem, the companies that are around AI, sometimes that use AI or sometimes that are not even using AI, but are part of the entire AI ecosystem, kind of like Kibu, Ari's company. Could you talk a little bit about what Kibo is doing as an example of this sort of ancillary ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks everyone for having me. Really honored to join the panel. At Kibu, what we're doing is authenticating humanity in the age of AI. So, we I think we're all very very aware that AI generated content is about to dominate. 99.9% of content on the internet will be AI generated within a couple of years, and that presents a lot of problems for humans just trying to navigate their everyday lives. And so at Kibu, we recognize that the age of AI is here. What we're trying to do is basically build in some mechanisms by which people can identify other humans and human generated content using small group trust as a means of identification and the maintaining of provenance of information all over the internet.
Right. So what you're doing is not employing AI itself. It's setting up the conditions for the people who employ AI to do so in a way that is trustworthy. Good.
No, exactly. And I would also say, I think for consumers as well to be able to understand, has something been created by AI or was it created by humans, and actually have provenance of information as it moves across the internet, and as there are over and over again opportunities for something to be altered and changed.
Yeah. So I know you're not directly using AI, like I said, but
Mhm.
you are a startup in the AI ecosystem. That's exactly sort of the space that we want to make sure that regulation doesn't overly dissuade.
Hmm.
What are the sort of impacts of AI regulation that you've seen in, not directly with you necessarily, but in your space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where the OpenAI sort of CEO drama of a few weeks ago, I think, is a good example of, people are really. I think this is a very unique technology in that there is an opportunity for great harm to be done to our society, and so I think people are really understanding that, we actually have to maybe move potentially a little bit slower than just, pedal to the metal. We're gonna innovate and create a new world. I think we understand, there needs to be some level of kind of pausing and looking at, like, okay, like, what are we creating? How is it going to, change everything about our society? But at the same time, I think, you don't want to fall into the trap of regulatory capture, where you're basically just picking a couple of winners, and the ecosystem becomes stagnant. And so I think, there's a tremendous amount of excitement. I think, especially in San Francisco, the level of enthusiasm around the AI ecosystem is pretty massive. I think, similar to kind of other waves, there will be sort of like a filtering of kind of like the actual people who are building great companies versus just people who are, riding a wave. But I think that there is we are on the verge of a new era, a la 1991 early internet. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks. Joseph, I forgot to ask, Joe or Joseph?
Joe, please. Thank you.
So, Joe, we've heard the importance of not overregulating, not moving too quickly, but also bearing in mind that we do want to regulate this thing that is going to be very important to our lives. What are some of the positive legislative proposals that we've seen come out in the U.S.?
Absolutely. And thanks again for having me. Building off the previous panel in terms of the various legislative products that are out there, I definitely want to echo the sentiment that, we're very encouraged by the amount of interest we're seeing on Capitol Hill, both sides of the aisle, both chambers, with members of Congress really wanting to get their arms around AI, understanding not only the technological implications, but how it impacts their constituents back home, and specifically constituents that may work in sectors that do not traditionally work with the technology sector, whether that's agriculture, healthcare, or other sectors of interest. So in terms of some of the specific legislative products that we're looking at, the one that I think we're extremely encouraged by is, again, another bipartisan, bicameral product called the Create AI Act, which would codify the NARE, the National AI Research Resource, which was a task force that was created via a National Defense Authorization Act from a couple of years ago. But building on my previous point, again, how can we as technology leaders, but also members of Congress, how can they push for legislative proposals that would democratize not only the use, but the access of artificial intelligence by these user sectors? And I think that's where the NARE, if created and if funded at the appropriate level, you're not only going to see the government invest resources, but you will see technology companies as well put forward, their computational tools, their open source software, or any other important data materials that other sectors can leverage and use to their benefit. And these sectors would range from all sizes, whether it's a small or medium-sized business. They would be able to leverage this NARE tool as a resource to, again, help build the amount of AI resources. Because some of these companies, they may have to invest, for more pressing business matters. They may not have the amount of resources to stand up an internal R&D department. So that's where I think the NARE would provide strategic value to those companies. And internationally, it would keep us in line with what some of our allies are doing in this space. So definitely encouraged by, again, the amount of interest, but also some of the legislative proposals. There may not be, a comprehensive AI legislation that moves this Congress, but I think, equipping members of Congress with the right level of educational materials will help inform them for future legislating as those opportunities arise.
Yeah, I've also been really encouraged by just how much Congress is putting into understanding this this issue area, before moving forward too rapidly. In contrast, maybe, with the European approach, I think, Joe, you can also give us some insight into the European approach versus the U.S. approach and how that might impact our progress in the AI technology race?
Absolutely, and unfortunately, I don't work under the for or in the European office, but I know at ITI we were pleased to join with CCIA and other technology leaders in co-signing that letter that raised concerns with the direction that the European AI Act was taking, especially as it relates to, I guess, their multi-tiered approach and looking or classifying general purpose AI and certain AI foundation models as either highly capable or as having a high impact, even though that criteria definitionally is still unclear in terms of how it would be not only defined but implemented. So, and switching over back here to the United States, I think we've also been encouraged in looking at the various not only AI forums but congressional hearings examining U.S. leadership in AI. Members of both sides of the aisle have agreed that yes, Europe is likely to enact the first comprehensive AI law, but we at the United States should not be hyper reactionary to what the Europeans are doing just because culturally and legislatively we're in a much different place than they are. So I think, as someone who works on the government affairs team here at ITI, definitely encouraged by that sentiment with members of Congress. So we'll continue to partner with our association partners as the Brussels product, nears the finish line.
Thanks. CCIA has been a supporter of open source projects for a long time. I'll throw this to everybody, but I think, Daniel, you can start. What are the positives and what are some of the challenges that open source will bring to the AI space?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that, as Joe was just mentioning, in the EU AI Act, we've had a lot of concerns that legislation really wasn't prepared to deal with open source models and open source AI contributions. And the risk there is from the regulatory side is that we've seen so much innovation in the tech sector come from open source. Pretty much every major company uses open source software at some point, either as part of their website, is running their servers, integrating into software they make in some capacity or another. And so, the concern is that, as there is progress and development in AI, if there's an attempt to create a regulatory framework that really becomes ultimately a software regulatory framework, it's not just regulating AI, it's so broad that it's regulating most software. And if the structure of that regulation is such that it only really works if you're regulating basically a company that's putting a product on the market, that takes away the ability to have all of these developers that are making contributions to open source modules and open source systems that are widely used and have again just created enormous open innovation that's useful in everything from academia and government to many commercial systems. And so with AI, first there's the risk that we're going to lose this opportunity, but there are also really interesting questions about how do you govern open models that are released to the public, that are you do the fine tuning of these models, the weights are out there, and you can't put in those controls that you might put in place for closed models or models that are not released publicly. So this is a big tension that we're seeing in a lot of the different regulatory frameworks that are out there. It's something that I think policymakers have to think through. But again, this is where I think we have to come down on the side of innovation, and we have to find workable policies that basically, instead of trying to regulate the development of software, really focuses on the use of software. So it doesn't matter if someone's using an open source or a closed source model to create deep fakes or spread misinformation or do any other of the harmful things that some people are concerned about. What should matter is who's doing that, why are they doing that, and can we hold them liable and enforce our laws? Not who made the software that they're ultimately using.
Ari, Joe, anything to add on that open source point?
Yeah, so I can't speak on behalf of individual member companies, but obviously at ITI, we represent companies that promote the use of open source models and software as a mechanism and means for fostering, public trust and transparency. And obviously, as those opportunities present, a lot of those companies will capitalize just to, again, ensure that they're putting their best foot forward, just to get that public buy-in with respect to their AI technologies. And on the flip side, we also have companies that specialize in, defense, national security focused AI applications. So that's where they would have concerns with, kind of just a widespread adoption of open source software. So that's where, it's a challenge that we at ITI are actively examining just to figure out where that balance can be struck, where the nuance can be applied. But I think, it's certainly a debate that we welcome among our members.
Ari, final words.
Yeah, I mean, definitely huge proponent of open source. We are building our Kibu protocol entirely open source. Our trust-based consensus protocol will be open sourced. And I think it's really important for open source software, particularly in this day and age, to kind of be the primary driver of innovation, because it's inherently so much more secure. The community can inspect and support and build, constantly, keep it updated, and it's not, dependent upon any single entity. And I think in the context of AI specifically, just anecdotally, something that I've heard people talk about is kind of the alignment problem in the context of open source versus closed source, where, the concern about closed source AI is that there's less of the public has less of an ability to see the whole picture and understand if an AI is truly aligned or not. So that was just kind of where my head went with that question of I think open source actually is going to be tremendously more important as time goes on in this age of AI.
Thanks. One of the other things that we heard about was the idea of sector-specific versus sort of universal models. Obviously, there are some sectors which are more sensitive than others, things like healthcare, financial systems. Daniel, how do we best approach that need to regulate differently in different sectors based off of, I may be foreshadowing the answer, but based off of sort of different levels of risk?
Yeah, no, it's an important question because I think, pretty much all policymakers have agreed that we should be taking a risk-based approach to AI. The question is, how do you do that effectively? And, again, this kind of gets to the question of where do you impose burdens and how do you do it? And so I think, attempts to say, well, let's just regulate AI, at the model level really misses the point that how the models are used are going to vary substantially across different sectors, even if they have, certain, original uses. So, for example, if you're talking about, using some kind of AI vision model to detect tumors, it might have some of the same underlying technology that you're using in a self-driving vehicle that's detecting obstacles. And that's going to be, similar to, maybe something that's detecting faces that's used in facial recognition. But they're ultimately very different and they should be tested separately. We're going to have different expectations for performance. We're going to have different impacts if things go wrong. And so that's why, this idea, for example, creating an AI regulator or an algorithmic, safety board or something like that, it really starts to fall apart because in most cases, we care very specifically about how certain sectors are using technology. And we want more and more regulators to look at the role that AI has within their sector and apply their expertise and obviously leverage AI expertise within government. We can't just have one AI set of regulators who are expected to regulate the entire economy. I don't think that would ever work and be effective. And, when we think about this kind of bigger question of what are we trying to achieve here, it's not just minimizing the risk from AI, it's also maximizing the opportunity. And that means, we need to make sure we're deploying AI in these sectors like healthcare and education and transportation, where, we can significantly improve lives, save lives, reduce costs that, are astronomical in many of these sectors. And there's huge opportunity to do that. And we need sector-specific regulators who can look at the nuances within their fields and look at how we can deploy AI both swiftly and effectively and safely.
Yeah, there are huge potential benefits from AI, and we want to maximize those. We don't want to just worry about the risks. We need to pay attention to all of the advantages that it'll bring. So, what are there's the notion of competition with China. The US is clearly in the lead right now. We have the leading AI developers here, but China has a lot of very talented engineers and scientists as well. What is the sort of single policy thing that the US could do to maintain our lead or even grow it? I just ask everybody here, but why don't we start with you, Joe?
So I think, yes, smart strategic policy that, again, encourages our industry to work collaboratively, not just with the key agencies, but also with key sectors that, again, are going to be using this technology hopefully on a daily basis to help improve cross-business functions. And then, yes, obviously, as it relates to what we mean by a pro-innovation policy, obviously following a lot of the points that you all had raised, we're following a risk-based approach that looks at use cases of the technology, not regulating entire classes or entire sectors of the economy and deeming them high risk. Because if we were to follow that approach, that would likely stymie innovation and would probably present some problematic applications and in terms of how we can grow our footprint here in the United States. But we can also here in the U.S. look at opportunities to again build and grow our R&D footprint. And I think there are ways where Congress and our agencies can explore industrial policies that do just that, and that will allow our companies, but also those that are from the startup community, to partner with agencies such as NIST, the NSF, the more science-focused agencies as well.
Thanks. Ari, Daniel, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to build on what Joseph was saying, really, I think it's and we're seeing this in Silicon Valley. There was a speech a few weeks ago on American dynamism from somebody, A16Z, that's been going around. I think that what really needs to happen is there just needs to be more conversation and more direct communication between Silicon Valley and Washington, because where the innovation is happening is in Silicon Valley, and it's happening really quickly. And I think if you look at what happened with the rise of social media, for instance, I think you can look at some of the problems that we're facing societally today being a result of perhaps a lack of understanding on the part of regulators when these technologies were kind of in their nascent period. And so I really think that the conversations like this, where there's a deeper, fundamental level of understanding about what this new technology is going to mean for our society, I think that's how we remain competitive, and also make sure that these technologies don't get captured for authoritarian uses. I mean, we see that, we're seeing that in China today, and I think AI just kind of makes that a lot scarier, because the exponentials are there.
Yeah, Daniel, I'm sure you have things to say, but I'm going to go to one last question, which I think is related. So if you want to give the same answer there, and we can start with Ari. We just asked about sort of what Congress can do to make sure that the U.S. stays ahead, and I think Ari, you just brought up a point. We want it to be stays ahead in a very democratic fashion. We want to value the democratic values our country and society are built on. Part of getting AI to a place where it can be of benefit is making sure that that Americans can trust what's going on in it. So what is the sort of single most important thing to do, or single biggest roadblock on that side of things, on generating acceptance within the population for how AI is going to change things?
I don't think there's a single answer there. I think it's a combination of a bunch of things. Obviously, I have a fairly myopic view in that I am really focused on building an ecosystem. Basically, the way that I think about it is in the future, in the near future, there will be a red internet and a green internet. And the red internet, we're not going to know what's real, who's real, whether anyone that we're talking to is a real person, or whether any of the information that we see is true. the green internet is going to be real. It's going to be authenticated, and there's going to be you're going to trust what you see. And I think in the age of AI, it's really, really important that we build the green internet as soon as possible, so that we can citizens are able to trust when their leaders say, hey, this is going to happen. Because otherwise, we're seeing this now with fake news and misinformation and everything else. It's just going to explode with AI. It's really important to somebody in the last panel mentioned sort of like keeping brakes help cars drive faster. Like I think there's some truth here to that. It's like in the way that we communicate to the populace, like this technology is going to change all our lives, but we need to remember that humanity comes first.
Daniel, I think we're pretty much out of time, so I'll give you the last word on things that can be done to make both Americans trust AI and what Congress can do to make sure that we keep our lead and our democratic values there.
Sure. Earlier this year, ITIF and a bunch of other think tanks released a declaration on a free and open AI. And, we basically said that just as the United States was the leader in thinking about a free and open internet, and putting democratic values at the core of internet values that we promoted all around the world. We said things like, we're not going to censor people online. We're not going to, require people to identify themselves online. You can have anonymous speech. We can have encryption online. All these things that were core to allowing basically democratic values to flourish on the internet. We need to be thinking about those same things with AI, because AI will be the tool that we use to communicate, to gather information. And so, we need to bake those in early on, because other countries, especially authoritarian countries, will try and block some of that. I really like what Ari was saying about the red and green internet. I'd say, I expect for a lot of us, we'll be living in kind of a brown internet where, we have both the red and green coming together. We're going to have the AI bots talking to humans and vice versa. And that won't necessarily be a bad thing. It can be empowering. And we want to make sure that when that's occurring, we don't have, certain countries trying to put their thumb on the scale and influence what these AI systems are telling us, what information we're able to receive, and what information we're able to communicate to others. And that's something that, I think gets lost in some of the kind of day-to-day debates about AI risk. And that's something that Congress and the United States can really play an important lead on in promoting those values globally.
Thanks. Well, I'm sure there are a dozen other things we could ask about on AI, but our time is unfortunately over. So I would just like to thank Ari and Daniel and Joe for joining us. And hopefully it was useful to our listeners as well. I certainly learned a ton between the first and second panels. So thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Josh.
Thank you.